Offline and with in time will just you close your eyes for me, for me. Who's who? No one. Us two ain't nothing here. We need to see. And no one watching me. No one's here, so let the music make you tall. We can find a way to separate from yesterday. So go ahead and forget. No one watching me. Two steps, shake up a leg, invisible way to move. I'm blessed to be unstressed. Let me forget with you. And no one watching you. No one watching you. We can move. And no one watching me. No one watching me. So move and let move. And no one watching you. No one's watching you. So we're moving.
Hello? Oh. Hi, we're going to just start in a couple of minutes, so if you haven't already, just take your seats, take your places. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Woo! Wow. You all have so much more energy, and I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. I know there's been tube strikes and all other things, so we really appreciate you being here. I just want to start by thanking our amazing BSL interpreters, Grace and Samaya, and also, and also Rainbow Collective, who are at the back helping us do the streaming and recording. And of course, the HL team for making today possible. It's been a big one. And just want to say welcome to everyone that's joining us online. Please message us in the live chat if there's any issues. And you can also send through your questions in the live chat. We'll gather them up for the speakers at the end. And just a reminder, we are recording today's session as well. I guess before we get into it, I want to just uplift some community agreements, which I think you might have seen on your way in, or even I think they were emailed around. And there's a couple that really stood out to me. The first is uplift and honor labor. We often speak to Sara Ahmed's quote, citation is feminist memory. And I think in this context, when we're talking about somatics, work with the body, there's just a really rich lineage that a lot of this work comes from, and often communities and people who are marginalized, whose knowledges are often unacknowledged. And I know our speakers will be speaking to that a little bit, and I hope you can all take that forward from whatever you learn today as well. The other one that really speaks to me that Farzana always uplifts is comfort and transformation, or comfort and vulnerability do not live in the same house. So an invitation into how you might prepare yourself to maybe sit with a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of vulnerability today, maybe sitting a little bit at the edge of what we already know, what we're already practicing together. And then finally, just an invitation to also take care of yourself. For so many of us, this is not just a conversation, it's really our lived experiences. It can feel very material, very visceral, so please do what feels right for you. Opt in and out, hydrate yourself if you can. Yeah, those are my invitations. I'm Nishma. I'm here today in my role as a movement medicine program lead. I've been with Healing Justice London for the last 2 years. I'm also an educator and organizer. I've been working also as a facilitator for the last 10-ish years in community, in movement context, really to build life-affirming and liberatory frameworks. My background was in law. I don't practice anymore, but I think it's kind of from that perspective that I stepped into thinking about what are the frameworks, what are the systems that we want to be building, and how can we prefigure that, right? So that's the context from which I'm coming today. I'm very much an abolitionist, and a lot of the work that I do is about sitting with contradictions, with conflict. And I think one of the contradictions that I sit with is actually very much around power, which is one of our themes today, and just what it means to be in leadership, what it means to be in power and model that in ways that are life-affirming especially when so many of the times I have not seen that myself. I've only seen oppressive power. I don't know what liberatory power looks like all the time, and that's scary. That means I'm scared of making mistakes. I'm scared of hurting people. So I'm looking forward to this conversation as much as all of you. I want to introduce our speakers a little bit. They will be introducing themselves, but just some context setting, I think, for today's conversation. There's a lot of intensity in our times right now. There's a lot of despair. We're being challenged in ways that I think can feel unprecedented, from global techno-fascism, genocides in Gaza, Sudan, Congo, elsewhere, a constant dehumanization in a lot of our media, a lot of our social media, the impacts of climate collapse. And we were just talking yesterday in the team about Palantir and their infiltration of our health system. They just released a book as well, which is really quite jarring. So sitting with all of that, and yet I feel at the same time we're on the precipice of real and new possibilities that are being made and fought for through really tangible building, creativity, organizing, resistance. And I think in order to get there, we need to reckon with the very fiber of what we're doing in our movements, but also what are we doing relationally. So I think I was thinking a lot about what enacting our shared visions requires. And I think what came up for me was just a really deep and sustainable transformation that isn't just about our society's norms, our society's practices, but also of ourselves and of our movements. So that's a little bit of what we want to talk about today. Some of the questions I think we've been sitting with at HJL around this is, who do we want to be in this time? How do we want to relate? How can we save ourselves time, energy, prevent fracturing, and embrace the things that really scare us? And how can we remain hopeful in that and take action? In that, one of the things that we think is that we really need to come together in unified ways, even as our strategies might differ across difference, across nuances, across approaches. And this evening, we're asking, how can we do that in a way that is bold, in a way that is powerful, and in a way that actually meets the scale of change that we need? And I really love Farzana was saying to me the other day about scale, not scale as infinite growth and just continuous growth, but scale in the way that one of our advisors, Sanjay Purohit, talks about it. So scale as the depth of change that we need to make possible. So who is here with us today? We've invited folks specifically who can really speak to this and that are able to really read the moment, both on a micro and macro scales. People who are already exploring the type of change that we need and how we come together in a way that's unifying across a really broad base. People who are reflecting on the structural changes that are required, as well as the interpersonal and cultural shifts. And people that are moving us in the direction of building the collective power and preparing us to be able to govern. I'm going to try to keep my introduction short, but I do want to speak about who's here because they're just incredible, and I know they're not going to big themselves up in the same way. So at HCL, we've been working with Stacey Haynes for quite a while now, along with Erica Lila, Brandon, for our program Movement Medicine, really exploring how we utilize politicized somatics to strategize, coordinate, and become ready to hold power. And we've been working with an incredible cohort, I think some of whom are here today, of movement folks, health and healing leaders, organizers, to build the embodied competencies that we need to cultivate in order to build and tolerate power and really reckon with what it costs us when we don't step into our power, when we collapse, when we fall into shame, when we make ourselves smaller. We've been developing very relational and embodied ways, skills that will allow us to harness our power whilst remaining open, remaining connected, present, and on purpose towards our longings, towards our visions, in the face of immense pressure. And some of you were here when we did some embodied practice of that earlier today. And I think the final thing I wanted to say about this work is that These are not just practices for individualized healing, but really thinking about the skills and capacities and competencies that we need in order to be involved in beautiful, long-term, generational movements across the UK. And we're trying to build that in a way that's really enduring, really surviving in the face of pressure. So yeah, we're really, really lucky to have Stacey in person with us today to speak to some of this work, as well as her much broader visions for our movements. I'm doing like mini bio readings, because otherwise I just think we need to know how great all the people are. So Stacey has been a leading practitioner in politicized somatics over the last 30 years, focusing on how it can bring transformative capacity to social and climate justice movements and help heal the impacts of trauma and oppression. She runs online and in-person programs and trainings and partners with social and climate justice organizations. Stacey's also co-founded Generative Somatics, a multiracial organization dedicated to building social justice capacity, and is the author of The Politics of Trauma, Somatics, Healing, and Social Justice. I think we have a QR code somewhere if you want to buy that book. Next, I really, really want to big up Farzana Khan, whose incredible mind and deep roots across community has brought so much of this work to the UK context. Farzana has recently articulated our conditions of satisfaction for this work. So basically, these are the things that we're really hoping to bring about and to build over the next 10 years as one part of HJL's work. And I'm going to share them because I think they really moved me, and I think they really resonate with so much of our experience today. So the first is growing a collective capacity to steward or forward a vision towards what we long for, even across our difference, even across different strategies, different coalitions. The second is moving away from polarizing or fragmenting and understanding that this can be counter-revolutionary towards what we're longing for, what we're trying to build. Having a greater capacity to be in generative conflict without breakdown, and generating safety when that does happen. And finally, generating and tolerating collective power in order to govern when we need to, which is what we're going to talk about today. I'm so glad Farzana is here with us today to speak to this as a panelist. That means I have to be chairing, but I'm okay with it because we get Farzana to speak more broadly. And yeah, Farzana, I want to speak. Farzana does so much. Farzana is a social sculptor, writer. She's a co-founder and executive director of Healing Justice London. Her practice really builds on her work in community health, repair, self-transformation, and is rooted in survivor work, disability justice, trauma-informed practice, and just a really long history of working with communities of color and marginalized and underrepresented groups. And Farzana is also one of the founders of Resourcing Racial Justice and is in a really deep inquiry around how wealth and resource mobilization and liberation can serve collective life. Welcome. And I just want to speak to, we were going to have, we have we have one other incredible co-conspirer with us. We were going to have two. Indy Johar, unfortunately, who's just an incredible thinker, was trying to get into us from Oxford and wasn't able to make it, which we're very sad about, but he's here with us in spirit. And I know that our speakers today have been in community with him for a long time and will really speak to a lot of what he might have shared today. But I do want to share last, but absolutely not least, we're so glad that Imara Jones has been able to join us all the way, coming, I think, this morning on a flight. So thank you so much for being here with us. Imara actually gave us the homework via Farzana to watch Andor. I don't know if anybody's been watching that. I've been watching it this week, so that's my homework, right? I've been doing it. If you don't know what it is, it's kind of part of the Star Wars universe, and in many ways it does really speak to this moment. It invites us to be in really broad-based coalitions against tech genocides, and yeah, I think we're going to speak to that a little bit maybe today. Imara herself brings such clarity on how we build the kind of movements and cultures that can actually rise up in the face of techno-fascism. She's been a rigorous student and teacher of understanding authoritarianism and what it will take from us to resist and build. Imara is the founder and CEO of Translash Media, a non-profit producing content to shift the current culture of hostility towards transgender people in the US. Imara has won several accolades, including but not limited to Emmy, Peabody, and GLAAD Awards, being featured in Time Magazine's 2023 100 Most Influential People on the Planet, becoming the first trans person to receive an award from the National Black Journalists Association. Imara also serves on the New York City Council Commission of Gender Equity and has served on several boards working on LGBTQ plus rights. So yeah, I guess big round of applause for all our speakers. Woo, woo. Thank you so much for being here with us. So I've spoken a lot, but I hope that provides a bit of scene setting and context. And I really want to pass it on to our speakers. And Imara, I'm going to pass it to you first. If you can share a little bit about yourself in your own words, just, why you're here, why this is important to you. And then my question to you is, what is your assessment of this moment? How are you reading these times? And what is it requiring of us right now?
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here, especially on Tube Strike Day. Not easy. I'm here because Farzana told me that I had to be here. Next question. And also because I get to see Stacey, who I haven't seen face-to-face in 3 years. But I have to say before I get serious that I actually feel a little caught out tonight, and it's kind of Farzana's fault. I'm going to tell you why. So yesterday I was scrambling to pull myself together to get to the airport and get the plane so I could be here on time, all the things. And so then suddenly I realized I didn't know how to dress for this. So I said, Farzana, how should I dress for this? And she goes, smash glam.
I said smashul.
Oh, smashul. I thought you said smash glam. So then I'm up here and I'm like, she has on trainers. Stacey has on jeans. And I look like I just came from Tia Claridge's. So. Alas. So just actually 2 preliminary thoughts before I get to my main answer. And one of them was just provoked by this the word power, right? And how we think about power. And I think that we have to understand that there is always going to be either a person or people in power. Always. And a key question is thinking about what you would do if you get power, and do you wield it in a way that makes things better or worse? It's literally the framework. There are 2 examples that I spring to mind, and I just think it's really important for activists and people who are trying to envisage a different future to think about this, because we often think about our relationship to power in an anarchist way, right? We're going to tear things down, and then once we tear things down, everything's going to be fine. But we're human beings, and we reconstitute order. If we destroy something, if you look at the whole of human history, you're always going to then reconstitute a new order. And if you don't know what you're going to do in order to create a new, better order, then you're going to recreate the olds. I mean, one of the things that stands out to me all of the time when I think about it is the French Revolution, right? Which is especially storied in liberal and on the left, progressive, it is the model, right? For tearing down literally a system that called itself the old regime and bringing in, supposedly a different way of being. But I constantly ponder how you go from monarchy to republic to empire. And it's because the people who created the republic never thought about what they were going to do with the power when they got it. And so it actually paved the way to a far more aggressive form of the thing that they thought that they were destroying. So remember that if you're not thinking about that, you're actually going to pave the way for the future, a future that's antithetical to the one that you think you're building. It's a very important thing. The other thing that stands out is one that's more recent. more recent for some of us, not everyone, but it's the Arab Spring, 2000, during 2010-ish era. And we know that, people who were young and idealistic and were brilliant organizers brought down an old regime, right? And once they had done that, regardless of what you think of her, Hillary Clinton went to them and said, so which one of you is gonna run for president? Like, someone's gonna have to, if you to carry this thing all the way through, you're gonna have to do something with it. And they were like, no, we just wanted to tear it down. Politics is above us. And you end up then with the much more reactionary regime now. So I just think that, like, it's really important that as we're having this conversation that we're thinking about our relationship to power and what if we get power, are you trying to build with it? Not that you are just in contention with destruction. It's a very important thing that we don't talk about. I think that the thing that I am pondering right now is one of the ways that we're in this moment is because there have been networked groups of people around the world who have had very focused discussions, ideation, planning, and action about what they would do if they got power. They had a very clear understanding that they were trying to get it. They were comfortable with the fact that they were trying to get it, and there is a vision that they're executing against it. And it's not by accident, it's by vision, planning, networking, and resourcing. So we just didn't end up in this moment where, in the United Kingdom, reform is, standing at the door, ready to seize power, right? We just didn't end up with a Donald Trump, right? We just didn't end up with these things. They have been in the works. These are people who are in conversation with each other about the world that they're trying to build. And I think that it's very important for people who want a different future to understand that that's a necessity in order to bring about a different vision. The second thing that I want to say that I think is really important is that a key part of their vision is fundamentally the fight over the body, right? Is the fight over the human body. And if you are a techno-fascist, if you are a fascist, the human body is the terrain of the battlefield, fundamentally and always. Because there's a fundamental understanding that, to quote Andor, that repression and tyranny are brittle, and that it will require constant vigilance in order to be able to have them actually sink deep enough so that they aren't contested. And one of the key ways then that you have to respond is literally through the elimination of bodies. And if you look at every single authoritarian, totalitarian regime in history that was at scale, the control, the destruction, the elimination of bodies is a central goal. Literally, the politics becomes embodied. And we know that a key part of the group of people who are in alliance, right, whether or not they can either be techno-fascist, corporate fascist or Christian nationalist fascist, right? There's a Venn diagram in which where they overlap is where their strength actually is. But if you look at technofascism, for example, you know, technofascism has its roots in the writing of Curtis Yarvin, who, through Peter Thiel, who founded Palantir, actually went about organizing, just in the last 6 years, billionaires in Silicon Valley. It's why, in a very short time, they all went from being libertarian, kind of left-leaning-ish, we all thought they were altruistic, kind of Steve Jobs types, to literally standing behind a president of the United States with authoritarian goals. And a part of Curtis Yarvin's vision, one of the things that he says, is that democracy and a free and open future for people is messy and is a failure because it's anti-capitalist. And therefore, what we need to do is to build a world where corporations actually supplant democratically elected governments, where those corporations then issue in a future of AI and robotics, which will then concentrate the wealth amongst what they see as the people who have the natural right to rule. They're also deeply eugenicist in nature. And they say that when you build that future, that in the course of doing so that you have to find, this is a quote, you have to find humane alternatives to genocide. That you have to eliminate billions of people from the planet in order for that vision to come about. It is deeply nihilist. It is deeply against the respect and dignity of every human being. And the power and that vision is actually what we're in contest with. That's actually what is at work here, and it provides a through line for so many things that are happening right now. You know, it is not an accident that the United Kingdom, which is the most deeply surveilled country in the world outside of China, more per capita cameras in the United Kingdom than any other country on the planet except for China, it would make sense that an AI giant like Palantir would take a tremendous interest in the national healthcare system and the data that it provides them on people within a deeply surveilled country. Right, those are the building blocks for this future that they want to create. And we have to understand that the United Kingdom in so many ways is a petri dish for these people and has been. I mean, one of the things that we know on anti-trans politics, for example, is that their interest in the fomenting anti-trans sentiment here is to be able to see which anti-trans messages work. And remember that the anti-trans conversation is deeply focused on the body. What body parts you have, what have you done to get them, where have you gotten it done, you know, what is the role of other people in either seeing, recognizing, and validating your body or not. Right, that's the essence of that conversation. It has very little to do with protection of women. As a friend of mine said once, you know, a third of my friends have been victims and survivors of sexual assault, and not one of them has ever said that it was at the hands of a trans person. So that conversation around trans people is all about the body. And we know that there's an organization in the United States, a legal organization called Alliance Defending Freedom, which has essentially been behind so many of the legal proceedings here in the United Kingdom that have led to anti-trans rulings. What they've done is essentially see what works so they can re-import those to the United States. Right, so there's a way in which these places and people that are seemingly separate are actually networked and working together. And we know, for example, as well here, that the surveillance state in many ways was legitimized, expanded, and learned from its tremendous and aggressive surveillance of Muslims in this country. And so one of the things that I think that we have to understand is that the politics that we are engaged in is not grounded in identity politics anymore, however you define that. I think all politics is identity politics, but that's a whole other thing. However you identify, that's how you engage politically. Period, full stop. So I don't believe that there's non-identity politics, but we all know what we're saying, right? When in this modern interpretation of identity politics. Politics are not even necessarily national anymore, right? These links between the current administration and Reform Party and Hungary and Putin, right? There's a way in which like these things are swirling together, this kind of dark, disembodied, technological, greedy future that they have in mind actually doesn't care about identity politics and needs us to practice that in a way in which we see our struggles as being separate and in competition with each other. That's actually a predicate to them being able to have the space to do what they need to do in order to build that future. So I think it's really vital for us to understand that what we are talking about is the right of every single human being to exist. We're literally back to a conversation about the necessity for basic human rights and dignity of everybody, of every single person. Because you're facing a group of people who don't believe in that. And who are willing to do whatever it takes in order to build the future that they want. And so I think that in so many ways, the politics that have been practiced, the politics that we've become accustomed to are actually defunct. It's a bankrupt politics in this particular moment, because the reality of what we're facing is so fundamentally different, and it's really important for us to shift. The other thing that I think, the last thing I'll put a sort of semicolon on at this moment is for us to really think about gender politics and the way that it plays in. And I don't mean like the basic gender politics around like, you know, the things that we think about in terms of like equal pay and all of those things. I mean the relationship to how we are thinking about how power develops, how it unfolds, and how our vision of the world is essentially based right now in patriarchal visions, even when we have women elected, right? Like, because you have to come up through a patriarchal system. The only person that I can kind of think of who challenges that on some level is Claudia Sheinbaum, that's in President of Mexico, who kind of like pushes against that at the margins to the extent that she can in Mexico. But what does it mean to have a society that actually honors the bodies, the integrity, the gifts, the minds of people who are not men? Like, what does that really look like? Because I think that that's where the antidote to some of this is going to come from. And I mean, really in the imagination. Again, it's not like, oh, well, justice for us means like equal pay for equal work. Oh, in a system which doesn't value labor and in which it's trying to shed labor and disemploy people and make them reliant upon the state so that it can, move them to, in a way, to be marginalized in the society. Is that really what we're fighting for? Like, what is that fundamental vision, right? And it's one of the reasons why there's such obsession with trans people in this particular moment, right? Because trans people are the fundamental challenge to patriarchal systems and norms of domination, which say that however we declare you being born is how you have to be for the rest of your life. And it's one of the reasons why all of these groups are so obsessed with trans people, because it ties into a fundamental challenge. It's the thing that holds up a mirror to them all of the time that says that the thing that you're trying to build is false. And you have to eliminate it from their standpoint. And so I think that, we have to begin to develop these alternative visions while at the same time being very clear-eyed about the danger of this particular moment. It is very, very precarious right now. And we can't shy away from that. But at the same time, I think if we're able to embrace that duality and understand that we have to build fundamentally different visions built upon bodily, not only autonomy, but honoring. Truly honoring what we are in. And the way in which we honor other people is the way we want our own selves to be honored. In every single way. Like, in that, I think that's actually the hope. And that is the framework and the guardrails of what I think we should be thinking about for the future.
I love listening to you. Really, thank you. We need clear view in this time. I'm going to enter in through a little bit different doorway, power governing and budgets. But I'm first going to talk about the first organization that I started was called Generation 5. And the purpose was to end the sexual abuse of children within 5 generations. And what we really mapped out is what would have to change every generation to get to a place where not only did child sexual abuse not happen, but people were really like, people find it abhorrent now, but then let it go on and on. But really we're in a place where it's like, I couldn't believe human beings and human society used to allow for that. That was the depth of change we were really looking at in a very particular harm and trauma and violation. And I really want to build on like Amara's invitation to vision. How do we want it to be? We chose 5 generations because the name sounded good. Generation 5, 7th generation was already taken by toilet paper. And, but also just looking at 25 years per generation, it was incredible to break it down and be like, what would need to change this generation? And to really let ourselves vision that way. And very quickly, any one issue reaches the rest. For child sexual abuse to end, the fundamental global economy has to change. Patriarchy has to crumble, right? But inside of that, this question of what do we want instead, how do we want it to be instead, is the harder question, but such a deep and profound and important question. The other reason I wanted to bring up Generation 5 is before we started this organizing project, I think we had about 15 different focus groups And I have to tell you, cold calling people back in the day, of like, will you come to a meeting? We're going to talk about child sexual abuse and how to end it in 100 years. It's not that compelling for people, right? It really took a lot of work to get about 350 people through those meetings, which was incredible because it was really the start of our base and the start of organizing. But something that happened, we had a number of groups that were adult survivors of child sexual abuse. I am also an adult survivor of child sexual abuse. And here's what was amazing to me. Over and over and over again, people weren't like, we don't want more incarceration. We actually want transformation. We want even people who've done that harm to be held, to be accountable, but to be held to re-find their humanity. And I really, at the end of those, I was like, something beautiful is happening, because those who've been harmed so deeply are still longing for something that's about wholeness. That something is, if we're talking about power, that's instead of power over, it's a power with. Yeah. And back in those days, we called it transformative justice, right? Bringing about and practicing transformative justice even in the face of child sexual abuse. Yeah. We call it abolition today, right? It's a wide range of what we mean by the practices. But when we're looking at power, in some ways, I want to ask us first, what do we long for? And to follow that thread of longing. And then how would power look once we followed that longing? Yeah? All right, I'm gonna spin forward a little bit. Another question I want to toss out, I think a lot about, there's an aversion, it's decreasing in the States, but there's an aversion in movement work, and has been in the time that I came up, to governing. Like, politics bad, politicians bad, but no replacement. No, like, what are we going to do instead? Who is going to govern? Who's going to make decisions? How are we going to do that? But one of the provocations I like to put out is, the US and Great Britain as well have multi-trillion-dollar budgets. Who do you want to have decide about where that money goes? I would like us to decide where that money goes. Yeah, that's really what governing is, many things, but one is getting to decide about resources. Yeah, and also, where do we want that money made from? It's big. If we look at where that money is coming from, what exploitation of peoples and the planet that money is coming from. But these are the conversations of power and the conversations of governing. And I, in some ways, want us to be like agitated together inside of it and go, what do we want to do? How do we want to do this? What would it look like? Even if we decided to start with, there's very interesting research about kind of our development over these last, let's call it 200 million years to be human beings, that really we are at our best in groups of about 200 people. That we actually get very overwhelmed and blown out, and we don't know how to have a base of relationship with over about 180 people is really what they say. And so even if in our thinking about this, we go, I'm going to start with 180 people. How would we want to relate? How do we want to interact? How do we want to decide about our resources? That's really the question I want to invite you, and I'm deeply engaged in, with what we want and what we long for and what we want to build instead. Yeah. All right, just to say a couple more things about maybe power in the big tent. Ai-jen Poo, who founded the National Domestic Workers Alliance, really organizing for labor rights for domestic workers, home health care workers, house cleaners, nannies, who were left out of labor rights in the United States in the 40s because of the history of chattel slavery in the US. The southern states would not sign on to labor rights unless farm field workers and domestic workers were left out. This is deep, right? And now it's 2026, and there's not federal rights yet for those groups of workers. But she talks a lot about power over and power with. And I think that's one of the ways I've started to metabolize. To me, our maybe what do I want to call it? Our trigger around power to me is very understandable. I think most of us have had very intimate, as well as community, as well as societal experiences of violence or domination or being demeaned or your peoples being genocided, right? Or just 2 generations ago, that happening to your people. So I think often when we talk about power, there's a very visceral response of like, I don't want that, or that's bad, or that was really painful, or that hurt. And to me, that just tells us where we're at in our collective processing of pain and violence and violation. It's one of the reasons we just want to keep leveraging somatics and many other healing arts to go, how do we get more clear of so much collective and personal pain that we can envision and strategize from a different space, yeah? And then power with, right? What is it to embody power with? That to me seems like the front edge of our practice. How do we decide with power with? And I just want to say, and I don't at all, I love us and I love all of our survival strategies, but I have to say so often when people are trying to practice power with, it's like, I'm sorry, no, I'm more sorry. No, whatever you want, no, it's totally okay. It's great. Do you know what I mean? Like that isn't power with either. That's just basically mutual appeasement, right? That's not what we're looking for. Yeah, but really looking at how do we decide about resources in a way that are life affirming and then build the infrastructures to do that. That's what we're playing around with power with. But I don't think there's a way to get there without healing from power over. And I think it's what freaks us out so much about the conversation of power and governing, because those echoes of our personal and collective experiences are just hanging out in here still waiting in many ways to be addressed, mended, grieved, yeah? I'll pause there.
I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, and it feels really important to the moment we're in the UK movement. And I say that as someone who has been in movement for a long time and is still a student of movement in so many ways, with some amazing elders who keep reminding me that there's an arc in movement and there are stages in movement, and it's, movements need to be nurtured as if they're creatures, and sometimes they can be very young and then they mature, and in some ways organizing activism is a process of maturation, the way we become adult and agential, that we access our power, our responsibility with the things that we're accountable for. So I'm really thinking about this moment and what we need in the UK and UK movements in particular, and that's really with the longing that we've had in Healing Justice to really support and nurture us to be able to be in bold and powerful movements that are enduring. And earlier on, we talked about it as 10-year arcs. Then we talked about it as longer arcs, and now we're very much in a generational phase where we know we're doing this work as groundwork for many, many generations to come. And I'm really sad Indy is stuck in Oxford, because I think one of the things that, and I'm going to try and channel Indy, is that he really helps us, just like Stacey and Imara do, to hold that really macro assessment of our time and to really understand how far, wide, and deep the things that we're facing. And he often says we're at this crossroad where it's mutually assured destruction or mutually assured thriving. There is no other way, and we are the ones who have to choose. But he also speaks to this point that I think, Imara, you've really made of, we often think it's us versus them when it's really a 1% and the rest of us. And I think it's so important right now in UK movement where, we've had hundreds and hundreds of years as diaspora, but also here from the enclosures to be separated and atomized from land, from body, from each other. Even, you know, like I grew up in Tower Hamlets, and I used to, my dad used to bring us to Toneby Hall just down the road when they started building single cell block apartments because they just wanted it for young professionals. And we went there to say, well, we need homes and houses that are not just for one person studios. And so this very intentional designed shape of isolation was strategic and is strategic. And so when I think about how fragmented we are, how afraid we are also of enduring connection, lasting connection, and the intimacy that's available in being in community and movement, I recognize that that's something that is by design, but we also get to design out of it. And it takes a lot of grit and rigor and discipline. And I think that a lot of grace as well for this moment in movement. The thing that I feel and sense the moment in terms of a lot of the genocides across the world, the way in which we're living this moment just in relentless grief and despair. But I also feel, and I feel this is true of both of you, I'm not hopeless. I feel like I also get to witness the ways in which people are coming together. But fundamentally, one of the things that I think touches on both of your points, in terms of the shift from a patriarchal shape of understanding what liberation is and what it means to be with power, is that our ideas of liberation are deeply connected not only to ourselves, but also to the living worlds. That the liberation that's coming and is here is not just between us as humans, and we have an elder and friend. I realized all three of us were part of this coalition called Belonging at Scale. So it's just amazing that we're here together. But there's another person called Pat McCabe, who's an Indigenous elder, also goes by Women Stands Shining, and she says, human-centered justice is one idea, but the type of liberation that is coming and that is already here is not limited to human-centered justice. And I'm really thinking how true that is to many of our Indigenous traditions, our global majority traditions. And that makes me really hopeful, because I'm seeing through the process of politicized somatics or other healing modalities, as we're having these conversations about what it means to be in dignity with ourselves and life, that there is a shift. There is a shift towards not just what serves us, but what also serves all life, and this relational template changing across time and space. And I see that over and over again. I give an example. My partner's Iranian, and we often talk about what's happening in Iran and this war in Iran. And at the same time as seeing the violence, looking at the oil economy, I used to work at a climate organization, and for many years we were talking about the fossil fuel industries and what does it mean to disrupt the inevitability or the seeming inevitability of a fossil fuel economy and the reliability on it. Like, there's so many ways in which, like even the Epstein class, the amount of power and money and resources that they have, we could have never known in our lifetimes about it. And so I think there's something about this moment of paying attention to and tracking for other forms of justice and liberation that aren't limited to our singular frameworks or political agendas, in terms of what liberation can look like, and really widening us out. And I think I'll kind of park on this point, but a big piece that we're also hearing in terms of repairing and revival is matriarchy, that there's this revival and repairing of the opposite of patriarchy is not women over, but actually designing life and repairing life to center supporting life, children, and the flourishing of all life, not limited to just humans. And I think that particular piece of matriarchal love from Earth Mother and beyond is also an invitation for our politics of wide love. Like, how do we be in wide love as a mother would when we're seeing far right folks and thinking that's not ours, when they are ours? Like, those people who have been captured by the elite, who have been captured by particular ideologies, are ours. And how do we, in a maternal or matriarchal, unconditional love, find enough of ourselves to go find them? And how do we be in a practice of that wide love that is how it's going to save the 99% versus the 1% who are out there and really don't care about us? And so this moment really feels like a moment of matriarchy that is singing her song back to us and reminding us to be in a wide stance of love that is unconditional and sees ourselves in each other. And I feel really excited about that. And I see it as alive and not something that is not present even in this room. And it gives me a lot of hope.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that was a really powerful point to end on, and I want to give us a little bit of a break in a minute, but I just wanted to uplift. I feel like each of you have spoken a lot about how we think about power, not from this place of isolation, fragmentation, patriarchy, but really taking us into connection, into intimacy, into love, and what would power look like from that place. And I want to orient us towards thinking about what strategies we need and what we need to be practicing in order for that to be possible. But I also want to invite you all to speak to each other as well. And I think we have, maybe someone can take us to the next slide for a moment. I want to invite you to just maybe turn to the person next to you or the two people next to you. And I've got two questions which I think should come up on the screen in a minute. I want you to share a little bit around what do you think is the cost to our movements when we don't access our collective power? And also, when is a time that you've seen an example of healthy or life-affirming power? One of the ways we think about this at HCL and hold life-affirming power is also as a practice of accountability, kind of like Farzan has been saying, that how do we take responsibility for the world that we're in and the reality that we have right now? And really, I guess, collapsing that us versus them. And that both makes us complicit, but also makes us capable and makes more possible for us. So yeah, if maybe you can turn to the person next to you. If you're online, put it in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And I know it's like tiring to sit in these chairs sometimes, so please feel free to move, stretch about, and have a chat with someone. And we'll be back in just sort of 5-ish minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes. some of the strategies that you know of, that you want to talk about, that you want to offer us, that we need to step into our power as movement organizers, as activists, as people doing this work in our communities?
It doesn't matter. Okay. Well, my answer may not be a total surprise given what I do, but there's a really ancient technology that human beings developed, and there's strong arguments that it's how we became the dominant species, because we don't have that many natural advantages. And that's stories. And that's the ability to be able to story tell. See? Okay, I'm done. I heard it. You know, I think that one of the most, we've turned storytelling into a consumption, right? We go hear somebody tell a story, we buy a book, we go to this, we watch that. And that's all fun, especially the trashy variety. But it is also the case that for much of human history, how we actually began to envisage ourselves as a community, how we created common values, how we created common visions, is that we told stories to each other. We co-created, kind of like what we're doing here, right? So I really do think that that has to be, it is an ancient tool that we need to rely on. And one of the things that I think about is a story that the artist, author Tourmaline, in her biography of Marsha P. Johnson, which came out last year, which everyone should read for a variety of reasons. One of the things that she talks about is that, you know, many of the people at that time who were in New York City and Times Square who were trans engaged in sex work. And so one of the things that Marsha P. Johnson would do kind of once a week was to like pool some of the resources that she had gotten during the week and then buy a hotel room in which she would invite as many people as she could crowd into that room as possible. And not only would that space be one where for a night even, or a couple of nights, not only was it a place of safety and support and laughter and of meals and caretaking, but she would also make them do what's called vision dreaming, which is that she would have them say, what's the type of world you want to live in? What does that look like? How does it feel? And I really believe that that type of activity actually created the world and the possibility that came a generation later, right? So I really do think that like things like that are really important right now. Like literally coming together and telling yourself stories about how you want things to be. I really believe that that's a bedrock for creating and unlocking another future. And while we can't be outside of the time that we're in, right? Like we are in a technological and digital era. It is a fact of life, and we can't deny that. We also have to understand that these things aren't our friends. They're not made to be on your side, right? That they are designed, it's like someone, conspiracy theorists during COVID were like, oh, the government's made this vaccine and they have a chip in it and the chip is gonna collect all your information. And another one of my friends said, they don't have to develop a chip because you carry it around with you all the time. Like, they don't have to do it. They've actually convinced you that this thing that is a monitoring device is a tool. And so I think that we have to be wary of how we are using these things. And we are not enough. Like, we all, end of the day, I don't want to think about anything. I'm doom scrolling. I'm actually not doom scrolling. I don't doom scroll. I watch pet videos and stuff. But and outtakes from like trash reality TV. But the thing that I realized that made me limit my scrolling at the end of the day is that I realized that every now and again, like, they would start slipping in, I would get a detransition message, right? Or every now and again, I would get, a thing about gender from like Tucker Carlson. And I was like, oh, this algorithm is designed to make me think it's meeting my needs while I'm slowly being actually acculturated into a different framework. So even the things that you think that you've cultivated are not actually under your control. They're actually designed to move you into a specific framework. So I think that doing things that bring us together in person like tonight, where we are talking about the futures that we want to build, we are telling each other stories, we are co-creating. That co-creation then leads to action, right? And then begins to create new realities. I think that there is something in that, combined with awareness of the devices that we sleep next to our beds with.
I love that you started with us as we're the storytelling animal. So right alongside that, I'm just gonna tuck in here, we have these very ancient biologies, like 3 billion years of evolutionary wisdom on this planet, which in the time of the massive universe is a very short period of time, but it's a very long period of time for us. And in this storytelling, and especially storytelling ourselves forward, we have these contradictions to grapple with inside of ourselves that also come along with this package, right, of being the storytelling animal. And those are these very deep survival strategies which we've experienced, but I think we gotta face and look at and work with because they are being manipulated in such an incredible way right now. And you all have heard of fight, flight. But very deep in us, there's an automatic fight response, just like in the rest of the animal world. A flight, like, let me get away. A freeze response, like, I can't do anything. I think a lot of people are in freeze response right now by the sheer overwhelm. Appease, right? An appease response. And dissociation. Fight, flight, freeze, appease, dissociate. That comes with the wisdom of having this body. The thing that happens, and I have this list, whatever happens when we die, if there's a very wise presence that I get to talk to, I have a list of questions. Because I'm like, there's some problems going on in this design. And in this design. That's funny. But one of the things that happens is those responses, again, that came with our evolutionary wisdom, when there's violence and repeated violence, they get stuck on play and we can't get out of them. So it's like hypervigilant, 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 and we can't set it down. Or appease, 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 and we can't set it down. And when it gets stuck on repeat like that, it is very hard to envision the next world. It's very hard to love the person next to us. It's very hard to love ourselves, yeah? So in this dance between, we are the storytelling animal, between storytelling and talking with each other, we have this layer of, we have to work with the impact of violence and oppression and how we get stuck in certain states that don't let us actually heal and do something different, yeah? Malkia Cyril yesterday, she founded this thing called Radical Loss. We got to have a conversation yesterday, and she's so beautifully tied together. If we don't grieve in our times, If we don't turn and face what's happening in our times, we are vulnerable to recreating the same thing, right? Like the revolutionary become dictator. We've seen too many times. What is it inside of us and with and amongst us that we need to heal and transform so that we aren't the revolutionaries become dictators, right? Somatics has a lot to offer with that because there's a lot of healing technologies. They've been around forever. They just express at different moments in different ways. But we can take ourselves off of that repeat and grieve, laugh, rage, whatever we need to do to get ourselves back into more current time and current connection. I want to tell you about this organizing project we're doing. I know I keep talking about the States, but it's where I live, and I don't want to assume that I know what y'all need to do. There's a lot of great research that says to defeat fascism and authoritarianism, we need to mobilize 3.5% of the population in an ongoing way, like a consistent way, yeah? Did you all see ICE get pushed back out of Minneapolis? That was 4% of the Minneapolis population did that shit. Isn't that so exciting? I was like, yes, okay, we can do this, yeah? So 3.5% in the United States of adults is about like 9.5 million people. And have you all heard of like Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate and Dick Schwartz? These are all like trauma healing famous people. Yeah, they're all straight white men. I don't know how that happened. I'm just like, how did the straight white men become the leading healers? This makes no sense at all, except for patriarchy and white supremacy. Anyway, they have very, very large lists. Like during the pandemic when we all were like, let me just join this trauma healing program online and see if I can, survive the next 6 months. So they have huge lists. And so a group of us, Kai Cheng Tom, some of you probably know Kai Cheng, and Kamen Defu, Karine Bell, we got together and we're like, we're gonna organize those guys. And we're gonna organize literally the millions of people on their lists as like a funnel, a welcoming, loving funnel, doorway to come into movement. So, yay! Yeah. So our hope is that 10,000 people will come through the very first program. Yeah. So on this side, we have a bunch of outreach. I think Gabor Mate's, his Instagram went live yesterday. But we're bringing folks in and really saying, like, good job healing, good job for seeking healing, good job for knowing how to regulate your nervous system, which is a phrase I really don't like, but I appreciate it means things to people. And then we're going to do this great process of political ed, of visioning, of, like, what's happening with power, power over, power with. And on the other side, everyone will have like 300 different movement organizations to choose from, and we're asking folks to make a year commitment. Yeah, 5 to 20 hours a month. So very pragmatically, this is one of the things I think we need to do right now, is bring in folks who are like, I care, but I have no idea what to do, or you movement people seem really cranky, and we don't want to hang out with you, right? Because sometimes we are cranky. But, welcome, who can we welcome in? Yeah, who can we welcome in?
This organizing effort also has an amazing name because it's called The Outer Work, because everyone's been hyper-focused on the inner work. So just really re-anchoring people into the outer work, which I really, really love. I just think that's amazing. I think in a similar but different way, some of our work at Healing Justice has been really to be able to orient and ground and build some of that capacity. And actually, there's quite a few movement medicine cohort members who are leaders and organizers in their own right who have been doing similar types of work. What I probably will speak to is some of the principles that I think will support us in this moment, thinking about power and governance. And I didn't get to specify maybe my understanding of power. Of course, there's the power, capital P, that both spoke to in terms of contextualized power over. but there's also the power that is the power that comes with our accountability and the agency we have, especially as people who have had power done to us, and how often, as Maurice Mitchell says, we leave power on the table, because to make contact with power, even inside of us, is terrifying. And then to keep that sustained is also really terrifying. But I think that we can't actually be in loving, accountable movements unless we're in relationship with our power. Because as soon as something happens, we're like, it's not me, I didn't do anything. But actually what we want to be able to do, and it's something we practice a lot in movement medicine and politicized somatics, is leading in. How do we enter into conversation, enter into conflict, enter to face the hard thing? And so I'm really thinking about accountability, not as the thing that we prescribe onto each other, but as a deep honesty about complicitness. All of us, because of the way that the world has been organized, are ableist, internalized racism, anti-blackness, transphobia, all of those types of things. And so really becoming honest in a way that recognizes our complicitness and our contradiction. And what I think that supports us to do is move away from some of the identity politics that gets, weaponized, and into a space of like us. This is our work. This is all of our work, with less shame, and more vulnerability and more humility. And so I think there's a huge piece around being able to integrate our power as part of making ourselves honest and right-sized in this work. And that then allows us to be in lasting movement practice. And I just also think this phrase, and I share this with the team, I struggle with the word governing because of its connotations and governance. And I do believe we need to govern, like we actually need to be responsible. As Grace Lee Boggs says, you can't change something unless you don't take responsibility for it. But I prefer stewardship. I think that aligns much more with my spiritual anchoring, that we are entrusted, and in the Sufi and Islamic tradition, everything is amana. So we are entrusted with everything, but we are entitled to nothing. And I think that's a really beautiful principle when we think about all life, including relationships, conversations, practice, material conditions, that those are things that we're responsible for and accountable for. And I think that then changes our relationship to power, because again, and governance, because we are in this deep entanglement, in this deep relationship. I think there's a beautiful thing about facing those that are perceived as powerful as peers. And I think I've seen that in dynamics, whether I'm meeting a funder or someone who's got a lot of social power, credibility, or clout. And actually, like, being there in my dignity, which we've had to train through politicized somatics, in my full height, in my width, in my depth, or my lineage, and see them in their right size and see my place in that. And I think a lot of us who have been marginalized, we've been forced to take on a shape that is really small. And so when we are in organizing spaces, we lose that length, that height, that dignity. And I'm trying to really practice being in peership, even when the thing is an oppressor, like actually seeing it as eye to eye, chest to chest, instead of from a very smaller, more collapsed space. And I'm noticing what that offers in terms of both the contradiction that I am, the complicitness that I have, but also the opportunity to bring someone in, to stay wide open instead of shutting the door, which I have historically done when I'm like, that's not my person, or these are not people I can organize, and trying to create that ability. And when we allow ourselves to be in peership, mutuality can happen. You can't have mutuality when we're in a power over, power under relationship. And so I feel like the more that we can get into a space of seeing eye to eye as much, and sometimes demanding it through our embodiment, through our practices, even if it's not how they perceive us, allows us to shift our movement dynamics. And then I think the last two things that I'll say is, a lot of the power that we're talking about is collective power. It's not about individual power. And again, going back to this point of, when we shape collective stories, when we do this work, even personally, we're changing our collective, is really trying to come into a we consciousness, a space that is not the way that we've been atomized and made individual, but actually the power that we have to hold is a power that we're going to have to hold together, and being able to practice being with each other's power. Like, actually, you know, we don't have to do it with 180 people, but even with your friends, your partners, how much do we invite in their power? How much do we invite in seeing them powerful and uplifting that and backing that and inviting them into more of that power? And I think that's something we don't do enough. And in politicized somatics, one of the practices we have is, I love the phrase where we train to be with our own power and each other's power, is called a spirited commitment to dignity. And I just love that phrase, that I am in a spirited commitment to your dignity and my dignity. And when I'm training being with my power and your power, that's what I'm doing. I'm in that commitment to dignity. And I think that really helped change my relationship to both what power can offer our movements when we allow it to be there with us. And really noticing that in the UK, and again, I'm saying broad sweeps, I've seen so many incredible, powerful experiments, movements, not be able to tolerate each other's power or the power in the room, and we combust and we burn out, and we aren't able to be with it. And so we're so trained in the fight, in the breaking down, and the more we allow it to be in the room, like, we know we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized. And so it really matters that we can be with power in this we way. And the last thing I'll say is, like, joy is power, and I think in our movements, we're also terrified of it. Like, there's a deep fear of the power of joy and intimacy, and those beautiful things that power also lets us get close to. Like, those are powerful sensations and powerful feelings and experiences that we get to have. And when we're not allowing ourselves to be with power, we also lose life. And the cost of it is the liberated lives that we long for with one another. And so I'm also learning how beautiful it is to, like, make space for power, to also make space for joy and life and intimacy and connection, and all that also offers us. So yeah, those are some of the things that I wanted to bring in.
Thank you so much. Wow. I was furiously jotting things down there. I've got lots of actions. I really want to open it out to you all for your questions. I think we have a roving mic somewhere. If not, let me know. We've got a spare one. Yeah, questions. And if you're online, please put it into the live chat. There is a way to send them to me. Someone's doing that. So yeah. Questions, and also we really, really welcome, as Stacey's reminded me, to hear your visions, what you're longing for, what you're working towards. So either or. If you pop your hand up, then Inaya will come around with a mic. Here at the front? Inaya? Here. Oh yeah, there. Yeah, there and there. Thank you.
Wait. What do I need to say? Remind me?
Questions or what you're longing for, your visions, what you're working towards.
Oh, I've got more of a contribution, if that's all right. But
Of course.
maybe at the end after everyone's spoken, just in regards to arts and just, yeah, literally coping mechanism. But I think it will be helpful. Just a contribution, but I think it will be helpful for the discussion. Literally,
Go
in
for
regards to arts. Literally, yeah. Spoken word artist, and I organize with No More Exclusions. But I guess what I'm speaking about is a healing process that I've been kind of working on for as long as I can remember. This is called Columbus's Maps. Yeah. I know I shouldn't, but I took the cards I was dealt and then I shuffled the pack. Revenge in my heart, I'm not so sure, so I'm doubling back. I'm not following Columbus's maps, it might lead me off track. And while I pondered, I put my thoughts in a poetry stack. Success driven, living in a trophy system, I'm so descriptive, but my foe's dismissive. But my trauma turned me composed and rigid. I've still got water in a bowl distilling. Stay far away from the killing, scar on my face like Montana. The protocols, no women, no children. And if I'm locked down, then how do my family feel then? You're shaky, but I'm sitting on a still fence. Looking for the value, it's been a minute since I've ill spent, so I've still got my 6 pence. Institutionalized, but I've still got my 6 cents. Maybe 7. Alienated, feeling far from heaven, but you know that this is mental slavery and I gotta keep the pastors guessing, but this is signed as a heartfelt message. AV. So AV is basically, stands for African American Vernacular English. Yeah, it's just about linguistics, language, and yeah, how other people speak basically. But yeah, that's my artist name.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that contribution.
Thanks, everyone. Maybe going back to something Farzana said earlier around looking at the far right who've been captured and looking at them as ours, and then juxtaposing that to building collective power. How do we, I suppose, embody or practice life-affirming power and try to maybe then capture the captured? I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but without conceding power as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that works.
To me, this is very important. It's almost like which level of reality are we talking about? So if I just be very pragmatic, my father voted for Trump. Right? He got very captured as a working class man into the MAGA ideology. And he had before into kind of born again Christianity. It's like this idea of where can he find place in power. So to me, it's like this complexity inside of ourselves. There is a level at which I will continue to love him, invest in him at the distance at which I am safe, right? And organize to stop the MAGA movement and how many white working class people, right, and middle class people it's grabbing. So to me, it's that complexity of like love at a big scale, and then what's effective action? What's needed? Where are the boundaries we need to lay down and go, no, not that, and here's an alternative. Because also what's tricky is if I look, other than the labor movement in the US, there was no alternative offered for so many of the folks that I grew up with and around. You know, so it's that accountability piece. So, you know, love can look many ways. Claiming them as ours can look many ways. I also would love to hear your answer to that, because I think it's super complex, where you organize and what it would mean to look at some of the, well, anyway, I'd just be interested in hearing your answer too.
Thank you. I really agree with that. I think that there is different ways to approach it. I think what I'm personally holding as someone who's a movement leader, a movement auntie now, I feel like I've entered that era where I'm like, come on, kids, we've got to get our shit together. I think it's a capacity we have to grow, especially when we've had an era and a good couple of years where cancel culture was really rife. I think some of that is shifting, where we're not really able to hold disagreement without feeling like we're going to unbelong or we're going to be pushed out. And it's made us really brittle. And I don't think it's everyone's work all at once, but I definitely think that if we're in leadership roles, if we're in roles in which we are lifelong as a path, deciding and choosing to be in movement, which I think is all of us right now, it has to be, then we have to grow that capacity, and it will look different, and it will look different in different contexts. But I'm inviting myself into that kind of matriarchal shape, because I think it's an accountability, and it's my stretch zone. I notice in myself, like last week, I was supporting a conflict between two movement folks, and one of them decided not to show up. And I had a moment going into the binary of like, well, they're not really serious. And then when I did a bit of like self-reflection and kind of really grounded myself, I realized I actually, there was a lot of shame and fear for the person. And actually I needed to bring them in a different way. And it's those little things. For each of us, it's going to be different, but it needs more of us continuously finding that width so that work can happen. And also because the far right for so long has been able to unify because it hasn't outcasted people or shut people down in the way that we've had to out of survival, we've had to out of protection, and part of the work that we're in and the practices is how can we generate enough safety, not total safety, because we're in ongoing oppression, that we can enter in and invite more people in. And we don't have to do it alone. Like, I'm in organizing spaces where I have to call in elders, because I'm like, I actually don't know how to be wide enough for it. Or, like I've completely got narrow, and I need like friends and peers to like help me find a bit more spaciousness. And we can all practice that somewhere, because, even inside of ourselves, we get narrow with what we don't want to speak about inside of ourselves.
I just want to ask, I think what you're speaking to, it connects to one of the questions that we've got from online, if you want to add anything. So they've asked, how do we organize when everyone within movements are expecting perfection when it comes to one's politics? And I think that speaks already to what you're already starting to talk about it, but if you want to add a little bit.
Well, the answer to that is you can't. You can't do that. And purity isn't the goal because you're human. You're actually not going to be able to build anything that changes anything if you believe that perfection is the goal, because human beings aren't perfect and never will be. Are things right? Are we learning from each other? Are they good? Do we have the right goals? Like, those are kind of the questions. But I think that if people are craving perfection, it's actually out of both fear and disapproval of themselves. And I think that at this point, I'll just leave it, because Stacey can then talk about how people can deal with that in their bodies.
You're so funny. I don't need to say it. No, it's funny.
I'll probably give a practical example and uplift Marai, who's with Million Women Rise and Project Talawan, just an elder sister, mama bear of movement, and a black feminist, abolitionist, like all of the things. And one of the things that she's been really helping us practice at Healing Justice London is to like be vocal about the contradictions we sit in. And I think that really then humanizes us, and we're in a practice of humanizing ourselves. So, she'll come in and she'll be like, I'm in the contradiction of having this type of ancestry and this type of ancestry. I'm in the contradiction of, like, I have positional power, but I don't have structural power. I have internalized ableism. I have internalized this system. And just naming it over and over again, one, to cut the shame, and also to create a me too. And also to remind us that we're going to be terribly human, as you said, in this work. And I found over time, being able to say it to myself, yeah, I have internalized these things, has then meant I'm not so quick to become defensive. When people raise concerns or raise like, hey, Fazana, you didn't do that so well, I'm like learning how to be like, yeah, I've got work to do. And I think that's just a really practical way to be working with what we've all got to be doing.
I think, yeah.
It's all happening now.
Yeah.
I know.
You just
1 minute before.
yeah, mouthy at the end.
Let's take them all, yeah. Let's take them all in one go, yeah. Go on.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. This question is mainly for Amara as a journalist. Really thinking about the ways in which the right have captured so much of the narrative and storytelling. It's important to say that, yes, storytelling is one of the oldest technologies that we have. Before mass media, we would get our news and information from people we trusted. It would maybe be religious leaders. It would maybe be people within our family and our communities. How do we capture the narrative from the right in a context where they have infinite financial resources? And that's my question.
We're going to do a stack and then answer them.
Thank you so much. It's been a beautiful evening. My question is on the second part of this evening's title, Preparing to Govern. And I know Farzana named that this work is generational work. So I was curious about what seeds of governing that we need to start sowing now for the coming generations, what different infrastructures, whatever it is, and if you're aware of any already existing movement leaders and organizations who are doing that work for us to turn to. And one very brief comment, a highly recommended documentary film called Behind the Rainbow, that was made by an Egyptian brilliant documentary filmmaker that investigates the failure of governance in the post-apartheid government. And it's a beautiful archival piece for movement because it interviews the movement leaders of the anti-apartheid space and them talking about how consumed they were with taking down the system and not spending enough time figuring out the budgets, as Stacey put it.
Hi. I think more than a question, it's kind of like a comment and an observation, which is, and I think you were talking about it earlier in terms of that practice, is that how do you, or rather one of the things that I feel is really missing in movement building is the skills development of staying in connection when we are face to face with the other and the oppressed. And I think that we've had such a push on politicized sabbatics around the body, but what we're missing is the interrelational skills building. And that's the next piece where I think we need to move to, because that's where we're failing constantly in terms of our movements.
Thank you. Yeah, shall I go to you first, Amara? The journalism, yeah.
Okay. So I think that it's really important to remember that, you know, as the saying goes, big things have small beginnings. And there are lots of smaller, I'm not talking about influencers, right? Because influencers aren't news. Influencers aren't institutions or organizations. Play an important role, but they're not the same. And I think that we have gotten a little bit too much into thinking about and wanting the things to inform us to go off vibes. And vibes change, vibes are not permanent. Vibes don't have staying power because they're very much kind of in the moment. But there are, I would say, find the smaller news organizations or media outlets and then build relationships with them and see what you can do to help them grow. Literally, that's what I would advise, because they are out there. they exist. And then that's how you begin to create the new. I actually wrote a piece for a foundation actually 5 years ago, literally about that. Like, you have to start with the things that are small and you have to grow them because they're out there. We're actually not starting from scratch.
I might briefly touch on the two questions. I think there's a lot that's semantics that's been set out there. And then as I understand and have been in I think 6-7 years in politicized semantics lineage, is precisely what you touched on, which is to repair our relational template so that we are into a we. The stopping point is not the self or the neoliberal self, but it's actually to train us to be with. And we made these, Nishman mentioned them at the beginning, but these 4 kind of conditions of satisfaction. How will we know we're effective? And what will have changed in 10 years? And we said, well, in 10 years in UK movement, we'll know we've been effective if we can steward a vision together, because most of us are, not even able to vision because we're in dismantling. And so to be able to steward a vision together, that we understand fragmentation, polarizing, divide us, them is counter-revolutionary. That our instinct becomes, as soon as we go to us, them, the otherizing, our instinct is this is counter-revolutionary. The third, that when we are in conflict, that we generate safety, we either learn the tools, we practice the tool, that conflict is going to happen, but we generate enough safety to do the repair or have good completions, good transitions. And then the fourth is the one to be able to generate and tolerate collective power. And those are fundamentally for us a project of collectivizing and not of the self. And in order to do that, we do have to start with the self and broaden out. So I really hear you that when we're, semantics is everything, right? The semantic truffle, the semantic, tables, everything's semantic right now. So I really appreciate the mispropaganda and also being able to identify lineages where it is a political project. And then to just Dima's point, I love this question because I'm really excited about what's happening in the UK. If Indy was here, the work of Dark Matter Labs in terms of like radical, they call themselves the Boring Revolution, really thinking about democratizing and civic governance, and really their work with Beyond the Rules, Many to Many, is really thinking about in the hands of everyday people. Sistrin thinking about legal infrastructure, civic square, neighborhood level, Hood Futures, Land and Black Imagination. Harm to Healing, which are doing an event tomorrow here, thinking about the infrastructures for the criminal, next week on the 30th, on the infrastructures we need to move out of a carceral criminal injustice system to visions that are much more liberatory, no more exclusions in terms of radical liberatory education. We actually have a lot. What happens is that our most radical ideas and visions don't get to sustain because of everything we've talked about. So that's where we need to be building the power. And I could go on. There's a lot of propositional pieces happening, and then there's loads of folks, migrants in culture, Shubak, loads of others who are doing that work, Project Talawa. Yeah, Level Up. Yeah. Oh my God, I'm looking around the room, I'm like, all of you guys, basically.
Everyone's here.
I'm sure you all know this, but as Amara said at the very beginning, this has been a purposeful project in the making, really for over 40 years. And did anybody see that film, Bannon? It's worth watching. It's like the fascist agenda, him traveling around the world, Hungary, India, going, hey, here's what it can look like. It's important, actually, for us to watch to understand how it happened. So there's the vision, and then there's a lot of like, who's on the school board? And there's a lot of getting into hyper-local decision-making and stewardship. I love the stewarding. Stewarding with an articulated vision of what we're stewarding toward. In some ways, it's like, they did a lot and organized a lot of resources in 50 years. It's like, cool, well, let's do the next 50, you know? There's something in the States too called the Working Families Party, which I like to lift up because they have really recommitted to electoral politics in the US. And it is really supporting, their platform is beautiful. You read it, I'm like, oh, that's the world I want to live in. But really recruiting people, actively recruiting activists, organizers, like, want to run? Where do you want to take more responsibility? How can we support you? So a lot of support, training, helping run campaigns, helping win elected positions, and then staying in relationship to help people be accountable when they're in a really intense then power over, right, context. So those pieces, it's like that really there's, it's like a, you know, this plus this plus this plus this gains governing power. Like that part is not too mysterious. It's just, are we open and willing to do it? And can we get inside of a shared narrative about the world that we're trying to build and also how we want that economy to work?
Just two really brief things, because someone was right. We didn't, you know, we could have taken more time to dive more into the governing part. But before that, I think that it's really important in terms of driving change is to find a small group of people whom you trust and work with them consistently. And that's not about changing, bringing together a group of people, getting everybody to agree, right? Because what happens with that is that those smaller groups of people, and they can be, you know, people of any background or of any stature, that then begins to create the momentum where those people will find the other people. And then those people then, and so then you are actually networking exponentially in a way that you're not necessarily aware of. So find the small group of people, 2, 3, 4, 5, that you really trust and commit to working with them over the long term. It's a very specific thing. Actually, a really great movement book is called Bury the Chains, and it's written by Adam Hochschild, who wrote the book about the Belgian Congo. What is it? King Leopold's Ghost. So he wrote a subsequent book, which is called Bury the Chains, and it's about how the abolition movement in the UK started, because it was totally improbable when it did. And it was literally 10 people in a room in the north of England saying, we're gonna end slavery. That's literally how it started. And it was quixotic, and it was like, it was like, one was like a house, you know, like a house maiden, another person was like a preacher. Like, it was not, you know, a distinguished group of people. But they committed to themselves and committed to working with each other and built kind of the first modern movement to change social behavior, and it's actually worth a read about literally how that happened, because it'll give a lot of hope. The second thing that I think is really important about governing is that we have to remember that, like, politics is playtime, governing is real time, and that, you know, so many people get invested in political campaigns, and once it's time to do the part of choosing the people in power and the incredibly tedious work around policy, you know, being engaged in policy conversations, putting pressure. All policy is politics translated into actual governmental power. I think that, like, it's thinking about that piece and who holds that and who's willing to hold those pieces of thinking about, even if you know that you're going to lose the next election, who are you setting up to be in power, and then what are the agreements about what they're going to do when they're going to govern? Or if you strategically back a political party, they get in power, what is your thinking about how to continue to pressure and to hold them accountable? And I have to say, in the UK, it's slightly easier than the United States because you have actually more representatives per person. I think we have one representative for every 700,000 people, and I think there's one member of parliament for every 70,000 people in the UK, or 60,000 people. So it actually is easier to hold your elected representatives accountable. And if they happen to be a part of the government, a lot of people who are in parliament end up being ministers or junior ministers or having ministerial roles. And so there is actually a way to leverage governing power here in a way that is more accessible than in some other democracies.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I know there are more questions that we didn't get to. I think some of the online folks, we sort of got to your questions in a roundabout way. But I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for being here. I was going to signpost to things, but I feel like you all did that really, really well. And I jotted down the books, the documentaries, all the things. So we will send that over to you from Healing Justice London side. And yeah, you'll find if you follow us or subscribe to our newsletter, you'll get information on all of our spaces. So please do that to find out more. And I think just thank you for being here. We at Healing Justice London are doing as much as we can in our role, in our capacities, but we also know that we need to make this work available to more than a small group of people. We need to get the resources, we need to mobilize them so that we can access them en masse, and we are trying to do that. So yeah, just thank you. We need all of us to be doing this work. I'm so conscious of, I got my local election thing in the post the other day. So it's just really on my mind, thinking about governance, power, thinking about the upcoming elections in a few years. So just inviting you into this work with us. And just want to thank once again our interpreters, Grace and Samaya. Rainbow Collective at the back for recording and streaming. Our amazing, amazing speakers. And of course, all of you, thank you so much.
And yeah, well, first of all, we want to thank Dishma as well. Then I'm going to take one moment to brag, which is a very un-British thing to do. But I'm American, so I get to do it. Which is one of the resources that I want to point you towards is at Translash, we produced, we have an investigative series called the Anti-Trans Hate Machine. It is an investigative series podcast, and it charts the global rise in anti-gender, anti-trans policies and authoritarianism, and lays out in very clear terms about how those things are linked. So I would encourage you to listen to that. And yesterday, it won a Webby. So.
Woo! Woo! Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We are a bit over, so we might need to clear out a bit swiftly, but thank you for being here. And yeah, have a good evening. Bye.